Hello, I'm Jim Cornell, and this is Base to Base, the weekly biotech podcast from Air Coastal Media. Yes, welcome again to the Base to Base Biotech podcast, and this is number 24, going out on August the 29th, almost the end of summer, which I always associate with the arrival of September, even though it isn't. And today is Lemon Juice Day, a substance that, as far as I'm aware, hasn't yet been touted as a cure for COVID. It's been a busy week here as things seem to be picking up again on the news front, which is always a good thing. Or at least I think it is. If you do have news or suggestions for who should be on the podcast, or any other suggestions or comments, please do get in touch at jim@deeptechdigest.com, which is also the address you can use if you're interested in advertising with us or sponsoring a podcast episode. Last week our conversations were with Fibrobiologics CEO Pete O'Hearn about fibroblast spheroid technology, and another conversation with Anna Kodina, Senior Director Strategy and Business Development at Psi, as we discussed artificial intelligence, digitalization, and the effect on labs. This week we're looking at more effects, and that's the effect of cuts to funding in the US, with Jean Peccoud, GenoFAB founder and professor at Colorado State University. And then we have a conversation on the fight against Parkinson's disease with Antti Vuolanto, CEO of Herantis Pharma. First, let's take a quick look at the news you may have missed over the past week at deeptechdigest.com. BioSyngene unveiled its TIL therapy strategies. Robotics is transforming cell therapy with 74% cost reduction, and we had an article on what is being called a new dawn for respiratory medicine. Syngzyme's bioconjugation platform has won the Golden Ticket program. Begin NGS is set to screen newborns for more than 1,000 treatable genetic disorders, and a solid tumour clinical trial has been completed. Biomedical and Novo Nordisk are collaborating on oral peptide drug delivery. A phase 2 study in non-muscle invasive bladder cancer has been completed, and there has been progress in the radiation maculopathy fight. In South Korea, a new discovery hopefully opens up new treatment options for Alzheimer's disease. A decompression sickness treatment has received fast-track designation, and we had an article on giving mRNA vaccines a technology boost, which is ironic given the content of one of today's interviews. Anyway, you can read all of these and more at deeptechdigest.com. So let's move on to the first of this week's conversations. While all diseases are terrible, we tend to think most about those that hit closest to home. And so for me, of particular importance is Parkinson's disease, as my mother suffered very badly with it, and it was painful to watch. There are many companies tackling the disease, and one of them is Herantis, a Finnish clinical stage biotech developing disease-modifying therapies to stop Parkinson's disease. Its lead product is a first-in-class subcutaneously administered therapy designed to stop and potentially even reverse the progression of Parkinson's. To tell us more is Antti Vuolanto, CEO of Herantis Pharma. Hello, Antti. Thanks so much for being here. I wonder if you could start with a bit about the history of the company.
Yeah, so Herantis Pharma is a publicly traded company from Helsinki, Finland. We develop disease-modifying therapy for Parkinson's disease. And the company actually has been established already 2008 on a discovery of a neurotrophic factor by Helsinki University researchers. And that neurotrophic factor called CDNF is a natural protein that protects dopaminergic neurons from degeneration. In the early days, the company developed CDNF protein through preclinical and clinical studies with fairly nice results. And the challenge was that neurotrophic factors need to be administered intracranially. And that was a really difficult thing to realize going forward after the phase 1 clinical study that we realized. And then we invented a way of getting the same activity as we have in the full-length neurotrophic factor into a small peptide molecule. And now we have this small molecule that we call as HER96 that has or captures the full activity of the neurotrophic factor, but now we can use subcutaneous administration. And this makes us really enthusiastic about the potential of HER96 for disease modification in Parkinson's disease.
It's a fairly hot topic, Parkinson's disease, and there's lots of companies working on that. What are the challenges when it comes to making a difference for people suffering from that condition?
Yeah, there are multiple things why it is so difficult or challenging to really have new efficacious therapies for Parkinson's disease. First of all, the location of the disease is in the brain, which is very protected organ in human body. So it's difficult to have compounds to penetrate the brain. That is maybe one of the biggest reasons that the current treatments can only treat the symptoms. But currently, nothing can actually affect on the disease progression. And maybe the second thing is that there is no diagnostics for Parkinson's disease before the first symptoms appear. So always the diagnosis is based on the first symptoms. And at the time of when the first symptoms appear, already approximately half of the dopaminergic activity in a certain brain area called striatum has already been lost. So actually, the disease is fairly progressed even at the stage when the first symptoms appear. And all of these aspects has resulted in the fact that there are currently no disease-modifying treatments available. So nothing can slow down or stop or even reverse the progression of the disease.
We mentioned that there are lots of companies working on this. How does your approach differ to what other companies are doing?
We have been able to have the activity of a neurotrophic factor compressed into a peptide molecule that we can deliver subcutaneously, and it efficiently goes or penetrates into the brain. And the neurotrophic factor, the mechanism of action is actually, it has multiple aspects. So first of all, primarily, it protects the neurons, the dopaminergic neurons, from degeneration. At the same time, it prevents the formation of the toxic protein or alpha-synuclein protein aggregates. That is one of the hallmarks of the Parkinson's pathology. And it also modulates the inflammation within the brain, so decreasing the inflammation in the brain. So basically, with the one compound, we have three different effects in the brain tissue. So we believe that we are more broadly addressing the pathology than many of the others that are working towards disease modification in Parkinson's disease.
All right. Could you tell me a bit more about your lead candidate and how that works?
Yeah, so HER096, as we call the lead candidate, is a small peptide, as I mentioned, and its primary target in the brain, in the dopaminergic neurons, is stabilizing a pathway that is called unfolded protein response pathway, which is activated in the brain when there is an accumulation of misfolded proteins, so direct link to the alpha-synuclein pathology. And HER96 controls or modulates the unfolded protein response pathway so that it functions again normally. So in pathological cells, it is constantly activated, and that, in a way, that chronic activation results in neurodegeneration and eventually cell death. But we can prevent that by HER96. And at the same time, HER96 helps the immune cells to decrease the level of inflammation in the brain tissue overall.
Where are you at with clinical trials currently?
We are currently running the phase 1b clinical trial, which is the first trial with Parkinson's patients. We have just recently announced that the study treatment part is completed, and we expect to have the top-line data readout by mid-October. So we are really in a pivotal moment of the company going forward towards a phase 2 efficacy trials.
Would this be something that is used as a standalone treatment, or would it be used in combination with other treatments?
That's a great question. And Currently, it seems that, or we believe that, first of all, with disease modification, we need to start as early as possible the patient treatments. The diagnosis of Parkinson's disease is always based on the appearance of the first symptoms, and often these patients will get the first line treatment, most likely levodopa treatment, early on. What we have planned is that HER96 could be used standalone or in combination with the early levodopa treatment. And the ambition of us is to demonstrate that HER96 can stop the progression, but we already have some evidence from the preclinical studies that we can also have some regenerative effect on the dopaminergic neurons.
In terms of the disease itself, what are you hoping to achieve in terms of the end result for patients? Is it stopping it where it is, or is it being able to completely reverse the condition or reverse it a little? What's the end outcome, I guess?
The realistic, challenging goal is to be able to stop the progression completely. And at early stage, that would result in much improved quality of life compared to the scenario that the disease symptoms would worsen over time and eventually result in very much compromised quality of life. With neurotrophic factors, you can't too much reverse or even, let's say, cure Parkinson's disease. As I already mentioned, at the stage of diagnosis, approximately half of the activity of the neurons has been lost. There are already neurons that have died earlier, and we cannot, in a way, revitalize those. And neurons in that brain region are those that are not there are no new neurons grown again. So we can't do that, but we can make some of the cells that have lost their functional ability to become again functional. So in that regard, we can also see some level of regeneration if things go exactly like in preclinical models.
Is the stage at which you're able to begin treatment making a difference?
Yeah, so the fact that we are able to use subcutaneous administration means that we are able to start treatments in clinical studies with early stage patients, even de novo patients. And it means that we are really be able to address patients right after the diagnosis. So we believe that this is, of course, a great opportunity for the patients if the treatment is as efficacious as we have seen in preclinical models.
So I guess a part of that then would be not for your company necessarily, but the earlier that diagnosis can take place, then the better it is for what you're doing?
Absolutely. And currently the diagnosis is based on the appearance of the symptoms, but most likely at some point of time there will be diagnostic tools that can, in a way, predict the appearance of Parkinson's disease. When this happens, I don't know, but most likely at some point of time we will see such development. And of course, those patients who don't yet even have the symptoms would also greatly benefit from this kind of a treatment that stops the degeneration process.
Does what you're working on have other potential applications in other neurodegenerative diseases?
Yes, absolutely. The target mechanism of action is not specific for Parkinson's disease. Many other neurodegenerative diseases have either similar or quite the same mechanisms behind, for example, Alzheimer's or ALS. But then there are also other disease areas outside of neurodegeneration that have many common features there. So we really much look forward for being able to study the same biology in these other indications.
Do you have anything else in the pipeline that you're working on?
So basically, we have a vast library of compounds from which we selected HER96 as the lead for Parkinson's disease. We have been concentrating on HER96 and Parkinson's disease for the past couple of years. But of course, going forward, and if the resources allows, we would like to extend looking at the other compounds in our library and exploiting the same biology across different disease areas.
Does that mean that you'd be looking to form partnerships to work on other disease areas, or is it just working on things on your own?
The company wants to create a partnership with HER96 in Parkinson's disease in order to optimize the commercialization path for HER96 from phase 2 to commercialization. By doing that, the company believes getting more resources for the other compounds and other disease or other indications. And that would be the way of really being able to address the opportunity that we have with the biology.
How's the fundraising situation?
The most recent fundraise was in February this year. And now we are quite close to the next value inflection point, which is the phase 1b readout by mid-October. And then, of course, after that, we need to carefully evaluate how we finance the forthcoming phase 2, whether we do that ourselves, raising financing for that, or whether we are able to attract pharma partners to be engaged with the phase 2 trial already.
Right. I know you can't predict exactly, but what kind of timelines are you looking to for this?
The phase 2 presumably could start by the end of the next year. That potentially will be quite a large study, at least from our point of view. Between the data readout and end of next year, we need to, of course, find the right way of doing the phase 2 and have the right resources in place.
Well, there are so many people globally suffering from that awful disease. Let's hope Herantis can contribute some good news in that area. We wish them well. Now, in recent weeks, the US Department of Health and Human Services has announced a major shift in its vaccine development strategy, with the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, better known as BARDA, cutting or winding down a series of mRNA-based projects. The decision affects contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars and touches some of the biggest names in the sector, from universities to multinational pharma companies. Supporters of the move say it's about refocusing on broader, longer proven vaccine platforms, while critics are saying it could slow innovation in pandemic preparedness and beyond. So today we're joined by Jean Peccoud, GenoFAB founder and professor at Colorado State University, and he can unpack what these cuts mean for the biotech landscape and the future of vaccine R&D in the US and beyond. All right, so maybe to set the scene then, could you tell us a bit about the cuts and the announcement that was made recently?
Yeah, so my understanding is that so the cuts, I think, are about $500 million. It targets BARDA contracts. So BARDA, it's a federal agency that is in charge of transferring basic research in late stage development of vaccines. So it's not the ones that are not totally ready for prime time and for being taken over by the private industry, but they are way past the early discovery stage. And so they cut 22 contracts that were supporting the late stage development of various mRNA vaccines. I think that the justification was, the official justification was that messenger RNA vaccines are not effective, which I think is a little bit misleading, and there is not a whole lot of scientific evidence about that. They're not necessarily perfect, but no tool is perfect. So it's only targeting one federal agency and one particular types of contracts.
Following on from that, then, we've seen mRNA vaccines introduced. So if they're saying that they're not effective, are they effective?
It's certainly a breakthrough technology, and it's been in development, I think, for about 20 years. So there's been a lot of federal investments in developing that technology. The pharmaceutical industry tends to be very conservative because of the regulatory approval. So, the silver lining of the COVID pandemic is that out of desperation, we got the approval to bring that technology to the market. I'm not sure that this would have happened if we were not in a crisis mode. So the messenger RNA vaccines for COVID were probably the best vaccines that were available. the estimates in terms of the number of lives that they have saved worldwide is somewhere between 15 and 20 million. So they have a track record. They were reasonably safe. And they have a number of key advantages compared to other vaccines. One is that they are extremely fast to make. You can make a batch of vaccine in 4 to 6 weeks. The other thing is that the process is generic. So you can use the same manufacturing process to make essentially any messenger RNA vaccine. So that makes it very easy to adapt, use the same infrastructure to develop vaccine against variants of an existing pathogen or vaccine against an emerging pathogen. And to put things in perspective, all the other vaccine technologies require a process that is specific of the vaccine, and the development of that manufacturing process in itself can take a year or more, and is very difficult to reproduce. So the speed of manufacturing, the lack of process development is really something that makes that technology stand out. In terms of the time of fabrication, so there are essentially two other types of vaccines. There are subunit vaccines where you produce a recombinant protein, usually in mammalian cells or sometimes in bacteria. Making a batch of vaccine using that approach is about 4 to 6 months. And you have inactivated vaccines where you grow the pathogen itself or an attenuated version of the pathogen. And then the turnaround time is 6 to 9 months. The flu vaccine, for example, needs to be planned pretty much a year ahead of delivery. And that lag time can really be a problem because sometimes like the pathogen or the infectious agents evolve faster than we can make the vaccine. So there is no other modality like this. They have couple of limitations. One is that they require cold chain. So, they need to be kept frozen sometimes at -70. People are working on improving the stability, but this is a problem in terms of deploying it in the healthcare system. It's much better if you have something that's stable at room temperature. The other thing is that the limitation of the COVID vaccine, for example, was that the immunity was fairly short-lived. We had to get revaccinated every 3 months. That's not great. I mean, it's much better than having but it's not the kind of long-lived immunity that you have with vaccines like yellow fever or polio, where essentially one shot gives you lifelong immunity. The reason for that is partly the simplicity of the technology. So the vaccines that give you more broader immunity tends to be vaccines where you have the entire pathogen as opposed to just one protein. And it's also pathogens that tend to be fairly stable and don't evolve as quickly as an RNA virus. So I think that it's really difficult to dismiss messenger RNA technology altogether. Certainly a breakthrough platform that can have also applications in other fields like gene therapy and things like this. It's a new way of delivering it. And it's not perfect, but it certainly complements other vaccine technologies that we are currently using.
Is the decision that was made all about the science, or is there more to it than that in terms of politics?
I think that it's not about messenger RNA. It's part of a political shift about US vaccine and science policies. I mean, there's been a lot of other decisions that, in the field of vaccines, both at the federal and at the state level. So HHS has restructured the CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization and Practice. So a lot of the people who were there were fired and were replaced with people who were politically closer to the leadership of Health and Human Services. There's been a rolling back of policies on COVID vaccines, mixed messages about measles vaccinations, and we are seeing some outbreaks of measles in Texas and in different parts of the countries as a result of those changes of policy. So why are they doing this? I think that there's it's known that there's a large fraction of the population that is either vaccine skeptics. I try to find some numbers, depending on the sources, it's somewhere between 20 or 30% of the population. I mean, it's a huge constituencies. And you probably have between 5 and 10% of the population with hardcore anti-vaccines. So you can change your vaccine policies, you can reduce the implication, the support of vaccinations, mandatory vaccinations and things like this, and you're going to gain political points with large constituencies. There has also been like a number of funding decisions about other types of research. The NIH and NSF budgets are, so NIH National Institute of Health and NSF National Science Foundation. There is ongoing initiatives to reduce the amount of funding available for research, funded by those organizations. Again, it's moving so fast that it's difficult to estimate the impact, but people are saying that, we've already seen like a 25% reduction in funding. We're probably headed toward like a reduction in half of the funding available for research through those institutions. They're also going after like financial aid for students, and that may have implications for higher education and everything. So I think that this is one piece that fits very well, and it's very consistent with the political agenda of this administration. I mean, you can understand it. It's not motivated by science. It's motivated by something else, and that addresses wishes and of a significant part of the population, whether we like it or not.
What's behind that agenda then?
My research is funded by NIH. I work in higher education, so it's difficult to be in denial of what's happening. I mean, I'm affected by that at a very personal level. I had to lay off people. I had, it has a lot of personal implications. And, I've been trying to understand what's happening and why are we in that situation. I think at some level, there is a broad resentment toward higher education. I think that, it's the expression of a failure of the education system. Rising costs, a lot of students live with, the debt, student loans that are going to be a lifelong financial burden. Graduation rate is not that great, in average it's about 50%. So you have a lot of people who spend quite a bit of money without getting a degree. You have a number of degrees. I see a number of students who get a degree and end up taking a job that they could have got with a high school degree. So the return on investment is not that great. And it's a system like, academic prestige is essentially based on exclusion. So the more exclusive you are, the better you are. And so, that leaves, the majority of the country out of reach of that institution. The healthcare system is also problematic. Like, we have a number of people in this country who don't have any kind of healthcare insurance. The ones who do still pay way too much for healthcare than they should. Like, no other country in the world has that kind of financial burden. People, go bankrupt over that. So if you look at this in this context, cutting funding for science, cutting funding for healthcare research, cutting funding to higher universities and other institutions of higher education kind of makes sense. Why would people want their tax dollars to go to institutions they are not going to benefit from? It's a tricky one, but we may have reached a tipping point where some of the things that are defining this country, because leaderships in biotechnology, leaderships in higher education is one of the things that make the US competitive. But if most of the population cannot connect to that or don't benefit from that, we may not be able to keep that because, unless the taxpayer, most of the taxpayers benefit from it, it's not going to be sustainable.
Is that system ever going to change though? Because I know that we had the Obamacare come in to try and get more people covered with healthcare. But if you change the system, what do you change it for, I guess is the...
I think that these are like such systematic issues. I'm wondering if we can recover from that. Like, it feels a little bit that the system is falling apart. And even in 4 months, it's pretty spectacular how effective the new administration, how effective and consistent the new administration has been in implementing its policies. I'm a victim of those policies. I don't benefit from them. But you have to give them credit for having their act together. They are extremely effective, and the changes that they have implemented are already having major consequences, and it's not clear that there is a path out of that. I don't think that even if there was a change of administration in 4 years, they would be able to, rebuild that. I don't know. Like right now, it doesn't look good. And especially with respect to healthcare, like the healthcare industry and the biotechnology industry is not an industry that has a great return on investment. The development of pharmaceutical, Deloitte publishes a report every year on the return on investment of drug development. And the return is low. It's, a few percent, and it's been declining for the last 10 years. So the research and development is barely profitable as it is. The investments have been de-risked by federal, like historically in the life cycle of drug development, most of the risk are borne by the federal government. Like the early discovery and clinical work is typically funded by NIH and various governmental agencies. Like the mRNA technology, I think, was initially funded by DARPA and then picked up by NIH. So there's like 20 years of federal funding before product hit the market. So if the federal government withdraws from funding the early development of those drugs, I don't think that private investors are going to rush to fill the gap. I think that they're just going to run away because now they have to bear more of the risk for a return on investment that's proven to be marginally positive. So it's probably better to, if you have money to invest, it's probably better to put your money on something that is more proven than this. So that could really have a ripple effect where, like right now, people who are in research development are impacted first, like people who get money from the federal government. But you could also see like biotech companies who depend on VCs, not being able to secure their initial or, additional round of fundings. You could see a shrinkage of manufacturing. If the federal government is not buying vaccines anymore, like pharmaceutical companies are going to shut down biomanufacturing facilities. The market is just drying up. So that can really cripple the industry and lead to a shrinkage of the entire life science industry that, may take years to unfold. But it's, I don't really see how we could turn that around.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you mentioned the personal effect in terms of your own department there, but what are some of the other consequences of these cuts?
The personal one is that at this point, I have lost all my research funding. So all the funding that I had from NIH has been terminated. It's not been terminated as a result of those policies, like my grant came to an end at the same time, but it's been very difficult to renew them. And at this point, it's so unlike, it was pretty competitive to begin with. At this point, I don't think it's even worth my time to submit another proposal to the NIH or NSF. So I made the decision to actually decommission my academic lab and shut down my academic research program. I fired my postdoc. I'm terminating my graduate students probably a little bit prematurely just to get them out of the door. And I'm trying to figure out, like, should I stay in life science or do something else? I'm not the only one. I've seen other people who were much earlier in their careers who came to the conclusion that they needed to run away from life sciences because that industry was going to shrink. So I've seen a number of people already making that decisions. I think at the university levels, universities are in a very tricky position because a lot of the research funding came in the terms of indirect costs. So when you submit a proposal to the federal government, and it's different in different countries. So, people in the US are familiar with that, but people outside of the US, not necessarily. When you submit a proposal to a federal government, there's a direct cost, which is a salary, the other people working on the project, the supplies, and things like this. But then the institution adds an indirect rate on top of that to pay for the building and the infrastructure and things like this. And typically for a state university, it's about 50%. So if you submit a proposal that is $1 million for 4 years, the university is going to get $500,000 of money to pay for its infrastructure. And you cannot pay for the infrastructure like through the direct cost. So the federal government, one of the things, like the federal government pays 50%, a lot of other sponsors refuse to pay that much. Like, charities often pay 15% as opposed to 50%. And so the federal government is working towards reducing the rate of overhead. That can change the economics of research in research universities significantly. They may not be able to maintain their research infrastructures without that kind of overhead. So what I'm seeing is that a lot of universities that are supposed to be research universities now are refocusing on teaching. They're kind of running a little bit like headless chickens, trying to figure out how they can charge more money to their students because that's the only source of income they can think of. I think it's a bit misguided because they've done that for a while already, and that's already, that's partly what explains the situation we're in. So I don't think that, there's a lot of institutions, I think, that are still a little bit in denial, still thinking that, it's maybe like a 4-year thing and things like this, because it's just an existential threat. Personally, I think that, it has led me to question the value of what I did as a scientist. I have a decent list of publications and citations, but if I look at it like critically, sometimes I wonder, well, did any of those papers make any difference in the world? So I'm refocusing my interest away from basic research and putting more effort in my company and making a real effort of approaching, what are the services that people need? Can I use my skills and my talent and my science to provide something that has actually immediate value because people are willing to pay for it, as opposed to, selling to a review panel for NIH or NSF a pie in the sky that is, deemed transformative, but is unlikely to have any kind of, real world impact in the short term. It took me a couple of years to get there because as teachers, we tend to tell people what they should be doing and what they should be thinking and that kind of things. And you cannot make a sale that way. Like no client, is going to pay you to tell them what they're supposed to be doing. So you need to become a listener of your clients. But when you do that exercise, that actually brings a new source of inspiration for you find interesting research projects that are fairly basic, but grounded in applications as opposed to being somewhat disconnected from industry. Whether I'm going to be able to, stay in science or not, that's a different story. And I'm looking at other options. But for now, I find it actually very interesting to try to get closer to the market and see how I can translate some of the research that I've done over the years into product and services that people buy.
And what are the consequences on a national scale, I guess, when it comes to jobs and leadership?
So first, the messenger RNA vaccine, like cutting that is really losing a weapon, to manage emerging diseases. And there's going to be more emerging diseases. COVID was not the last one. It was not the first one. So it's definitely put the nation in a situation of vulnerability and being less prepared to deal with. We're losing a lot of the benefits of what we've learned in the COVID pandemic. The messenger RNA technology is really a segment of the biotech industry where the US had leadership. So if we don't maintain that leadership, somebody else is going to be taking it. And China is extremely aggressive in life sciences research, so they're probably not that far behind. But also, like economically, the lack of support of messenger RNA vaccine has led to layoff already. Like, I think that Moderna, who is leading that, that industry has laid off, 10% of its workforce recently. And vaccine manufacturing is something that, we do in the US. We have the infrastructure to do it. And these are good manufacturing jobs. They pay well. They don't necessarily require a PhD. They are physical jobs that you can't replace with AI. So, you're missing on opportunities to create the kind of jobs that, this administration wants to create. And there is a big disconnect there between their economic agenda and the way they're managing science. They don't connect the economic impact with the science. And also something that is a little bit sad is that vaccination is actually one of the aspects of public health that provides, at least in the US, most of the vaccinations are free to everyone. It's paid by the federal government. So it's a great equalizer. It's the only part of the healthcare system where everybody has access to it, no matter what their level of income, their coverage, and that kind of things. So really like weakening vaccine development, vaccine policies, just increases the inequalities. It's a little bit of a paradox.
You mentioned the jobs and the leadership. Do you think that it will lead to, we've heard the term in the past, brain drain? Do you think that therell be a lot of American-based scientists move to different countries to
So I looked into
work?
that myself. I actually applied to position in Canada and in Europe. And what I'm saying is that really there is no other market where, I came to the US because of the research infrastructure in life sciences. And when I'm looking back 30 years later at what is available in other countries, there is nothing like it. I talk to people in Australia and things and in other countries, everybody is looking at this as a global crisis. It's not a national issue, it's a global issue because the leadership that the US has in life science research is unparalleled anywhere else. The only country that is making investments somewhat similar in size to the US is China. China is extremely aggressive. They've been very aggressive and very consistent for decades, and they are catching up very quickly. Now, whether it's going to lead to a brain drain or not, I don't know, because, if you want to work in China, it's probably better if you're Chinese to begin with. So, I think there's plenty of talent in-house. They don't need to import talent from the US. Not everybody who is working in the US is going to be, ready to move to China. So there's a significant fraction of the scientific workforce that originates from China. So those people, it may be easy for them they may have great opportunities. Personally, I'm not really considering going back to China myself. Going to China myself, that's a bit of a stretch. So I don't know about brain drain, in the sense that people are going to move to other country, but it can certainly lead to a brain drain in terms of talent going to other industries. And you can have something a little bit similar to the nuclear industry. For example, in France in the 70s, they were building a lot of nuclear reactors. So there was a thriving nuclear industry until they stopped. And they've lost all that expertise. And now they're trying to revive that. And it's very difficult to rebuild an industry when you have lost the pool of talent that, made it successful in the first place. So there is a real possibility that smart people who are working on in life sciences now are going to go to financial services or other things rather than, staying in life science, because if there is no job opportunity, that's, they will have to do something else. And you won't bring them back to life sciences later on.
Well, yeah, but as you said, once you've made those decisions, it's very difficult to turn that around, because it's not just a case of saying, we'll start again, because...
So I'm going to have a positive lining. I'm going to finish on a positive note. To be honest, I think that the life science industry, the fact that there was so much, the return on investment in life sciences is so low, is a problem. If life sciences was way more profitable, less capital intensive, and more profitable, we would not have the same problem, because it could be self-sustainable. The fact that it's so dependent on taxpayers' money is not healthy for the industry. And so, someone that I was talking to, and she was in the process of actually, she had decided to leave the life science industry. She was really saying, well, this industry needs to be defunded to actually put their act together. They need to change the way they're working. They need to be more efficient. And, there is a lot of things that could be improved in the way research and development is managed and things like this. So maybe this is a crisis that is actually going to force the industry to rethink its methods and, move away from the old approaches, and blame the complexity of life, for all their lack of performance. And maybe this is a kind of shock that will catalyze a revival and a renewal of the industry with more modern and more data-driven approaches and things like this. I mean, it's not going to be extended completely, and maybe a lot of people are going to lose their jobs, but there may be an opportunity for some companies and some research programs and things like this that can show positive results of their research much faster to emerge, and that may lead to a renewal, sometime down the road.
Well, let's hope there is a silver lining as well.
Adversity is the mother of inventions, right? So that's a lot of adversity, and maybe that will lead to positive results that we count.
A very revealing interview, and hopefully Jean's company takes off and the effects of the cuts are not as damaging as they could be. And it's also great that he finished off with a silver lining as opposed to all doom and gloom. So that's it for another podcast. It's a wet weekend here, so back to normal. If you do have questions or comments, suggestions for guests, or want to sponsor one or more podcasts, please do get in touch, and you can do so at jim@deeptechdigest.com. So until next week, wherever in the world you are, I hope you have a great week. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next week for another Base to Base Biotech podcast. The Base to Base Biotech podcast is an Air Coastal Media Limited production.